All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for taking time out to join. We may have some others join here in a little bit, but wanted to start off with an introduction and roll call. My name is Erin Capps. I'm with Adkins, and I will let Miriam introduce herself with Waterworks here in just a bit to start the introductions off. And what we're doing today is the Pennsylvania Pre-Disaster Recovery Plan, our webinar for the county. And we've been working on this effort with both the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency and the Department of Community and Economic Development. What we're looking at is having a draft together in March. And as part of that, we will have county templates available as well. And this will be for you to use that to create your own pre-disaster recovery plan and include in there the details that you need that make sense for your county and your area. And what we're doing today is an overview of that process, some items we'd like to consider, and we very much would like to have a discussion as well. So with that, I am going to let Miriam introduce herself, and then I'm going to do somewhat of a roll call. I know some people are muted so that we don't have a lot of noise, but I'm going to go in through our list and registrations that we have. And if I don't call your name, I'd like for you to do your introduction as well. So I'll turn that over to Miriam to do her introduction now.
Thanks so much, Erin. So this is Miriam Belbludia with Waterworks, and we have been working with PEMA and DCD and Atkins on this planning process. And so just as we start off, some housekeeping things. We're using WebEx today, so as you'll see, there's a chat window if you are logged in online. You can use the comment box that you'll see in there or the raise hand function. If you have an issue, if you're having trouble hearing me, please let us know if you have any questions. And then at the end, we're going to be having a bit more of a discussion. We want to hear from you, what issues you're facing at the county level, what resources and things would be useful to you, and just make sure that that is being captured in the state's understanding of the planning process, as well as in the templates that we'll be providing to the counties. So one other note is that the webinar is being recorded. So if you have questions that come up after the fact, you'll be able to refer back to it. We'll also be providing the slides as well as the accompanying notes. So you'll have all that information once we wrap up these webinars, and please do let us know if you have any questions. And next, we're just going to go to some introductions so we know who all is joining us today, and I'll let Erin take that.
Thank you very much, Miriam. I don't think we have anyone from FEMA on or that was registered since they were on earlier webinars, but I'm going to give just a second. If there's somebody that is on from the FEMA region, please go ahead. I don't hear anyone. Okay, now I know from, I believe from FEMA, Fred Boylstein is on. Are you on, Fred? Okay, he is not on, but he had registered. And we had PEMA on as well. I don't think we have anybody from DCED on this webinar, but if so, please announce yourself.
And we did have Jessica Trimble from DCED who was attending the webinars that were offered on Tuesday, so she's been an active participant in the process as well.
I think she's would be the only one attending, and I think that was her only date. Okay, I think we had several people register from Franklin County. So if you are on from Franklin, can you announce yourself, please?
John Thierwechter.
Hi, John.
Hello.
Thank you for joining. Now, are Jacob or Brian on as well?
This is Brian. I'm on.
Excellent.
This is Bob Pavlich from Franklin County.
Thank you for joining.
This is Brian Stevenson, also from Franklin County.
All right. And then we also have, I believe, we have Darlene Bracken on. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm here. I work in Pima's Western Area office.
Thank you for joining. And Aaron Norris? You may be muted on your cell if you're calling in. We can't hear. How about Joel Landis? I think you're on, but you just muted. I think we can barely hear you. That might be some if you're using your computer audio. Sometimes it's difficult to hear on those mics. Okay, I saw your chat, Joel, so I'm glad that you're here. If we haven't called your name or for an introduction, I know there are a few on from other counties as well. Please just use the chat box as an introduction, because I know that sometimes with the computer audio that's an issue. And also, if that is the issue, just please make sure if we're not hearing when you ask a question to use that chat box as well.
All right,
so
thanks,
that,
Erin.
Yes, I was going to say I'm going to turn that over to Miriam.
All right. So today, as Erin mentioned, we're going to be giving you all an overview of the state's pre-disaster recovery plan and really focusing in on how the counties fit into that plan, your role in recovery, and then going through some of the things that can be done now on the front end to help ensure a smoother recovery. So if we go to the next slide, which should just be the introductions. Erin, I think we're having a little bit of a lag. Sorry, y'all. The great thing about webinars is it's a way to reach everybody. The difficult thing is that often there's some technical challenges. So thanks for your patience. So as we just saw, we went through some of the introductions. So we've had PEMA and DCD at the table, and then Atkins and Waterworks have been working on this planning process for about the last year. And you know, we heard from a number of you all on the phone, and then once we have the discussion at the end, we'll really be getting into sort of your role in recovery. So please stay tuned for that, and we'd love to hear directly from you. If you're not talking at this point in time, we just ask that you put your phones on mute so that we minimize some of the interference, because that can cut down on the audio quality. So the pre-disaster recovery plan, the goal of this planning process, and as you'll notice and we'll discuss, it sort of fits in with other planning processes as well that you might be more familiar with, like the hazard mitigation plan, But the goal is essentially to help guide the Commonwealth's recovery operations following a disaster. And this can be whether it's a federally declared event or a non-federally declared event. But essentially, the planning process has considered what the threats are, the hazards that are likely to impact Pennsylvania, and then really focusing on sort of the coordination of recovery efforts, making sure that we're addressing what the needs are, the capabilities, the demographics, and the governing structures. And, you know, recovery activities might be short-term, medium-term, or long-term, depending on the kind of event, but really trying to focus in on sort of what that transition looks like and what are the activities and the coordination that needs to happen so that it happens as smoothly as possible. And the plan has been developed in accordance with FEMA's National Disaster Recovery Framework, as well as the Pre-Disaster Recovery Planning Guide, and those were recently released in 2016 and 2017. So if this is your first exposure to this kind of planning process, it's because it's relatively new, but it's sort of an important component in helping support the recovery efforts both at the federal level, the state, and then the county and local level. So in terms of the process, it's been ongoing. It's been shared in leadership from PEMA as well as DCED. And we've been engaging with executive departments, the state agencies, as well as the Pennsylvania VOADs, the Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters, that are all involved in helping guide recovery operations. And the plan itself focuses on sort of detailing the coordination and the execution of recovery plans, policies, and procedures. So again, we're focusing on what can we do before a disaster hits so that it is as smooth as possible. So that sort of begs the question of how the counties fit within the state's pre-disaster recovery plan and what your role is being on the ground in recovery. And so, you know, our goal is to focus on the county's role, and so supporting the needs of local jurisdictions in recovery, focusing on coordinating with the state, and then supporting both the preparedness and mitigation efforts that hopefully reduce what the actual recovery looks like. And focusing on sort of those transitions. So as you're transitioning from response to short, medium, long-term recovery operations, and a lot of these things are already being done at the county level, at the municipal level, but really sort of focusing on, okay, are there any missing pieces in connecting these needs during a recovery, and what can be done on the front end just to make sure that it's smoother once if something happens. So one of the sort of purpose of having a county plan that fits in with the state's plan is identifying those recovery goals, then looking at the priorities and policies that you have in place, and really focusing in on sort of the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. So making sure that it's very clear what is who's doing what and when. And then also the importance of integrating external partners. So when you're looking at a county plan, you can have a range of approaches. Some of them can be more formal, some of them can be more informal. But you really want to make sure that you have sort of those component pieces, so the goals, the priorities, the policies, and then making sure we're clear on the roles and responsibilities. In terms of plan activation, so looking at that transition, so when you're going from response to short-term recovery, and then what happens in the medium and longer term, and making sure that within that there's a very clear process and it's very clear about the responsibilities. And so something that, you know, you can consider and what we're hearing from other counties is, you know, if it's not already considered as part of job descriptions, as part of, making sure the people that are in these roles already, perhaps adding that so that there's real clarity on who's going to be responsible for what during recovery. So if we move on to looking at your pre-disaster recovery needs, the first place to start is looking at what are your goals. So at the county level, what are the goals for your recovery process? And one way you can do that is to start by looking at what are in the state's plan as a model. But, when you're looking at determining your county's goals, you can do it in different ways. I mean, you can look at different sectors. You can look at the recovery support functions. So those are community planning and capacity building, economic, health and social services, housing, infrastructure systems, natural and cultural resources. So that's a way that sort of guide your thinking around goals. And also you want to consider things like the speed of recovery, how fast you want to be able to be back up and running, and what efforts can be taken for disaster risk reduction. When you're looking at setting your priorities, you're wanting to think sort of what are the priorities in the short term, in the intermediate term, and then in the long term. And so, again, you can think through sort of the different recovery support functions, but, how quickly do you need to have your critical functions back up and running? What about facilities, vital resources, thinking about housing, and then services and programs? And then one thing also to be thinking about throughout is sort of the coordination, both within agencies at the county level, as well as how you're going to be coordinating with the state and with the municipalities. And then thinking about, should any infrastructure be damaged in an event, what does the restoration look like for that? So again, there could be sort of several ways that these can be organized, and one way to do it would be by the recovery support functions. The next thing you want to think about is determining responsibilities. So you can look at sort of your existing roles within your departments and see, can you add things related to disaster recovery to those roles? What we heard from other counties in previous webinars is a lot of times you have somebody who's wearing multiple hats. And what is it going to look like? What role will they be playing in a recovery? If possible, you can look at appointing somebody, a local recovery coordinator or recovery manager. And we'll also be talking a little bit more later on about this local recovery task force and what that looks like. But essentially the focus is on incorporating recovery responsibilities into job descriptions, and then, pre-planning on the front end who is responsible for what, because that just makes everything go a lot smoother when something happens. In terms of partners, this is something that we really wanted to focus on because the importance of developing these relationships is so critical in having things move smoothly. So establishing partnerships really gives you an opportunity to have insight on the recovery process, gives them an opportunity to have insight on the recovery process and how they're going to fit into recovery. And, it's possible for you to, again, identify potential partners for each recovery support function. So, again, we're looking at planning, economic development, health and social services, housing, infrastructure, and natural and cultural resources. You can also look at engaging the private sector, which often has an important role to play post-disaster, as well as nonprofit groups, particularly those groups that are active in the VOAD. And then when you're looking at government, you want to think about other agencies that might not traditionally be involved in emergency management, but that have an important role to play in recovery, as well as the neighboring counties, municipality governments. And sort of the important thing here to think about is when you're building partnerships, you're really, you're wanting to build those relationships, build trust, and also to have agreements in place so that you can go to these partners to provide these things when you're dealing with a recovery. So when we move on to looking specifically at building those relationships and stakeholder engagement, I want to think about who are some of the important players who may not see themselves as having a role in recovery, but ultimately will. And when we're thinking about sort of how this all ties together, so the state plan the goals and objectives that are in the Pennsylvania Pre-Disaster Recovery Plan are consistent with the FEMA guidance and FEMA's Pre-Disaster Recovery Planning Guide for state governments, and they're sort of nested within the goals from the Hazard Mitigation Plan, which I'm sure many of y'all are very familiar with. And so as we see in many of these plans, the role of stakeholder engagement is very clearly articulated. So, enhancing consistent coordination, collaboration, and communication among stakeholders aligns with the recovery goal number 4. We also see in the Presidential Policy Directive number 8 that the importance of stakeholder involvement and, this focus that we've been hearing a lot about on whole community planning. And so, what you want to be thinking of is the importance of sort of building those bridges today. And the reason for that is that, essentially building these relationships and engaging stakeholders when, the sky is blue, everything is going smoothly, is going to help you when an event happens. And again, sort of the importance of building trust both between departments, agencies, and then also the outside stakeholders. And also, this helps you when you're engaging the state agencies, resources, and authorities. So making sure that all of these things are sort of lined up on the front end is very important when you're dealing with a recovery situation. Ultimately, it's just going to help things go smoother for you on the back end. When you're talking about engaging outside stakeholders, so this, has been a recurring challenge that we've heard from counties, the difficulty of getting public awareness or participation in different planning efforts. But ultimately we all know the importance of increasing public awareness on the need for disaster preparedness. And sort of there's multiple action items that are identified in the state's hazard mitigation plan, as well as I'm sure the local mitigation plans focus specifically on public outreach, engagement, educational efforts. And, the importance of these things is obviously wanting to provide timely, accessible information, as well as managing expectations. So making sure that the public is aware of what you at the county level are able to prepare or to provide, what your role is in a disaster, and helping make sure that they're also taking individual preparedness actions. When we're thinking about community engagement, we also want to think about sort of the ways to do it most equitably and wanting to think about how the public is engaged through other planning processes. So if you already, we all know that everybody's time is limited. It's hard to get folks to participate in community meetings. And so one thing is to think about how you can sort of bundle some of these processes and integrate them so that you're asking people for their input and then building upon it. So if you're having meetings for other planning processes, can disaster recovery be incorporated into that? You can also think about if there's ways to reach people where they are already gathering rather than asking them to come to another meeting. Some counties we heard from are also using technology and ways to try to reach folks who might not be able to join in person. So thinking, what are some creative ways that you can build those relationships, engage stakeholders? Some ways are establishing community advisory groups, steering committees, and another way to focus on recovery is to establish a local recovery task force. So basically, a local recovery task force is going to fulfill the same role as the state's recovery task force, but at the local level. And so here you're going to see counties and local political subdivisions coming together with stakeholders to manage their recovery and coordinate with the state. And so in doing so, a great idea is to coordinate with regional assets, such as your economic development districts, your chambers of commerce, and your recovery task force can also help inform future mitigation plans and just make sure that, the priorities are reflected at the local level into the state hazard mitigation plan. And then there's an opportunity to coordinate with those volunteer groups, as well as to help develop community recovery guidance based on the experience of what you're seeing on the ground. So in terms of capacity building and training, part of why we're offering these webinars is an effort to make sure that at the county level you're being kept up to date with what's happening at the state and how y'all fit into that plan. We will be providing, as Erin mentioned, a template for a pre-disaster recovery plan at the county level. And so we anticipate getting that to you by March, and that should help guide you through this process. There's always the Emergency Management Institute. And then also just there is a project website that would be good to refer to. So it's actually in the comment box, but and again, there's it's at PDR.com, and so you'll see more information about the project as well as recovery resources. One of the things that might not seem like the most exciting topic, but is really important, is sort of building up your administrative infrastructure. And so this is really crucial, getting these pieces lined up on the front end. So looking at what are your standard operating procedures, what memoranda of agreements, or memoranda of understandings do you need in place? So whether that's with neighboring counties, municipalities, what do you need to have in place so that folks understand what they're providing, what is needed in a recovery? Making sure in terms of budgeting for disaster recovery, so even if a lot of the expenses are going to be reimbursable, you may have upfront costs, and so is that budgeted for at the county level? And then looking at data tracking. So it's really important to think about what types of data you'll need to be tracking for recovery processes, and then knowing sort of what are the reporting procedures that need to be put in place that are going to help when you're going and filing for reimbursements when you're trying to show the damages. And another thing is just sort of thinking about administratively, what can be done to coordinate with different departments. So, for example, when you're working with code enforcement, who's going to be helping with substantial damage estimations, if you can be coordinating with them on the front end, so that that's going to be a smoother process on the end. And so we wanted to open it up now for a little bit more of a discussion about how your plan or how your county is planning for recovery. We've heard from a lot of folks that you're undergoing or you've just recently completed a hazard mitigation plan, and then how does recovery fit in with that?
So I'm going to
And
put
so-
Franklin County on the spot a little bit because I believe they just finished with their drafting their mitigation plan. And so, I mean, maybe John or Bob, like if you have any comments on how, if you've thought about a pre-disaster recovery plan, how that would tie into your mitigation planning efforts.
Well, I'd say we're currently working on a plan, have a draft.
Are you working on the mitigation plan draft or working on the pre-disaster recovery?
We're working on a recovery plan.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And so as part of that, have you put together and looked at, kind of a task force or who would be involved for the longer-term recovery support functions?
Bob, you can jump in if you want, but we have not reached that point yet as far as I know.
Now, what I was thinking about is we had a pretty good cadre of people for our hazard mitigation plan, and that was a good jump-off point. We're ready to start having meetings for this plan.
Excellent. Well, and hopefully with the templates provided and having the drafts from the state, that will help in as kind of not only as a guidance, but also as a way to check back and see what's all included as you get into the drafting timeline. I mean, and hoping that will work for you. And the only reason we have this drafted and the reason we're looking at March timeline is because we want FEMA Region 3 to look at the state's plan and to ensure that there's not anything in addition they want from a federal standpoint to be included in it. But if there is something, because you are already working on your county plan, I don't think there would be any issue with FEMA if we were to share with you some of those documents in advance if that's something you would like.
All information is useful. Thank you.
Okay, and I have Jacob's email, and so that's something we can send so you have that. But otherwise, we're looking at having it more finalized in March, just for that reason. So we're making sure we're including all of the pieces.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious at the county level who you're seeing as sharing coordination for recovery. So, we heard from Allegheny County that their recovery coordination is basically shared between the Emergency Services Department and Human Services, and that they also collaborate with the county VOAD and local emergency management coordinators and elected officials. Who are y'all engaging in recovery efforts? And, some of them may be some of the same players as in the hazard mitigation planning processes, but does that I would love to hear some of y'all speak to who's at the table when it comes to recovery.
We anticipate having our risk management folks, which are part of our Human Services Department. Also, our county plans will be involved with it. We will probably reach out to, there's a local development consortia that's here. And you're right, there are a lot of the same players that are in our hazard mitigation plan, but figuring out each of their roles and responsibilities in recovery is the next step in figuring out how we're going to tackle this thing. We haven't got that far yet.
Great, thank you. Any of the other counties want to weigh in on who you're engaging and who shares responsibility when it comes to recovery?
This is Shar with Somerset County. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
I attended in August at EMI, the local disaster recovery, the local role. And we are just getting ready to do our update to our hazard mitigation plan. And I think one of the important partners to have would be the planning department, the commissioners, those that set the policies for like code enforcement, like you had mentioned. Those that set the policies for building structures and, because if you've got a whole neighborhood destroyed, how do you go about rebuilding that? So we need to get those partners involved because with emergency management, we're kind of do the short term, but when you get to the long term, we're kind of not there. We're more in the response and short-term phase. So we need those other partners to go to the long term.
Yes, absolutely. And we're hearing a lot from PEMA on the focus, especially on substantial damage declarations and coordinating with municipalities when you're going to have to be making those determinations.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point on the long term because, as you said, the emergency management piece, and that was a lot of what Miriam said. You're looking at your short term, medium, and long term, and it is hard to commit people to that, but it's so important to have at least, during your blue sky time, the titles and the roles of people who will participate for those key long-term functions. And it's wonderful that you're looking at things like that, like your building codes, because some things that you can do is something like have a moratorium on building after a disaster until you've had a chance to meet and see if you want to update the codes before builders are allowed back in. And having those business partners even as stakeholders is very key because you can already have meetings set up and they know, and that just really helps for communication with internally and also externally as well as if those partners are already identified. So that is a fantastic aspect, and I'm glad that you're looking at that.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more from folks about capacity building at the county level. So we heard going to EMI being useful for this. I'm also curious about the role of CCAP and if there's other helpful ways that they all are able to build up the county capacity.
Hi, this is Darlene from PEMA Western area. I think one of the most important things are VOAD groups, and I've worked with them out here for a long time. So for those counties that don't have them, you can have everything in the plan, but if you don't really have it as a workable group, you're going to be, kind of set back when it comes to disaster. So, I think that's one of the most important things is to try and pull those groups together in your county. And right now we have in each area office a VOAD liaison. So if you are struggling with that, maybe give them a call and partner with them. How we've worked it out here in the Western area is we'll have an informational meeting where the county will just tell about, what they do day to day. And I've gone out and I've done presentations on what PEMA does and how VOAD all fits in together with that and how we can partner together. And so, there is a little bit of a process there, but, if that's something that a county needs help with, I would advise having them call their PEMA area office and asking for some assistance there because really, when you're looking at recovery, it's kind of like two-pronged. You have the infrastructure part of it, where hazard mitigation comes into play, but then you have the human aspect of it. And like Shar said, sometimes you have the short term, but then who takes care of the long-term issues, especially with people and housing and things like that. So that's where your VOAD, your long-term recovery committees come into. But you need to start getting those formed now, like you had said here in the presentation, in the blue sky days. So that would be my advice, is to really work at getting those organizations, Red Cross, Salvation Army, your churches. You have UMCOR out there, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, Church of the Brethren, all kinds of organizations. If you want to look up National VOAD, that's pretty much an extensive list there of them. But try to get those organizations together if you can and formalize VOADs.
Thank you so much. That's great. For those of you on the line, have you developed any steering committees or community advisory groups, whether it's for recovery or some of the related planning processes? And what has worked well there for you, and maybe what have been some of the challenges? And something that we were, been hearing is, again, the challenge of asking people who are doing sort of multiple things, multiple roles, to participate in another committee or group. So I'm curious if you've had any ways that you've been able to sort of coordinate these different planning processes, if there's ways that you found that work well to gather the input that can be applied for recovery when you also have them already in one place for perhaps a different planning process. I take it from the silence that it's been working really well.
Or maybe they don't have it in place yet. Also, too, if anybody's having difficulty that's talking and we can't hear, I haven't seen any hands being raised, but we do have the chat function, too. So if there's somebody that is talking and we can't hear you, please use that chat function.
How many counties do we have that are actually working on a plan right now? Or I know this is kind of new, and until they get the template, maybe they haven't been working on it, but are there counties that are working on this?
I know of a couple. I mean, Franklin, who's on the line now, and there's another county that has gone through the process, and they're at meetings, but they're not on this call today. But I don't know if Allegheny County has started, and we have Susquehanna County on as well, and I don't know if they've started also.
Chester County, Pennsylvania has started.
Oh, yes, that's right. Thank you, Hillary. So Chester County has started. On the line, we know that Franklin County has started. I know that, I think, Miriam, you're saying, and we have them on, Allegheny County has started as well. Or at least they're looking into the process of it, but I don't know of others. Shar, you said Somerset County, you're looking at that too?
Yeah, we haven't officially started looking at a recovery plan to do one, but I think with our hazard mitigation plan update coming up, it would be a good time to try to do it in conjunction, because one of our main challenges is engaging the municipalities, engaging the supervisors and the borough councils, because we don't have, even for the hazard mitigation plan, it's hard to get them engaged to that.
And I think that's a challenge with Blue Sky Times that we see overall is, when an event hasn't happened, it's easier for people who are already wearing multiple hats to get involved in the day-to-day and not make time, for planning efforts. But that's a fantastic idea to look at doing the planning in conjunction because you have a lot of the same key players when you're putting your mitigation plan together for at least doing some of your meetings for pre-disaster recovery planning as well. But to answer your question, Darlene, I think it's just a handful that have actually begun.
Okay, thanks. I just wondered about that.
Yeah, I think Chester County would be the furthest. And that's from working with Tom and Hughes and Ernie Sabo. I think that that Chester County is the one that is the furthest along, with their meetings and actually getting drafts together.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more from counties as to, what kinds of trainings and resources, tools are useful for you. We've offered, this is the fourth of the training webinars that were offered, tying together sort of the counties with the state plan. And as mentioned, we'll also be providing that template. But, just want to hear from y'all if there's other things that would be useful to you, and how you can best engage with this recovery planning process.
This is Bob Pavlich from Franklin County. The recovery planning at the local government level course that's provided as a G-Series course here in Pennsylvania was a good course to get you started on this, but I think as the state plan develops and the templates are pushed out, it may be something to modify in that course to help us kind of as a tutorial to go through this.
Which course was that?
I believe it's recovery at the local level, local government level. Is it 205?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 2-day course, a 4-day course at EMI.
Okay. I'll be teaching that in Clarion and Crawford in February, so
Yeah, great.
take that into consideration.
Was that Darlene?
Yes.
Great. Yeah. If you can send us that information, we'd be happy to send it out to all the county participants.
You may have a full class, Darlene.
Pardon?
So you may get a full class, Darlene, in February. So that would be good too. I mean, yeah, our timeline is March, but at the very least, if it's showing drafts at that a class, we're happy to work with you to do that.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the overview that was presented today about the Pennsylvania Pre-Disaster Recovery Plan and the role of counties in that plan? If you have any questions as we wrap this up, please feel free to email us. Hillary's email address is in the chat box. And again, there's more information on the plan available at papdr.com. And we'll be in touch with you all to follow up with the notes and slides from these presentations should you want to refer back to anything. But thank you all so much for your time and interest, and we look forward to connecting with you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.